So today I'm going to share some of my research, which, as Mendel mentioned, is on musical life in the Warsaw Ghetto, and here focusing on my work on beggars' songs. The Warsaw Ghetto, as I'm sure many of you know, was the largest ghetto in occupied Europe, and while every ghetto in occupied Europe was a site of suffering and misery, hunger and disease were unusually acute in Warsaw for a number of reasons. Within the ghetto's walls, thousands of desperately impoverished people engaged in a daily battle for the scarce resources of survival, and it was in this desperate context that beggars actively competed with one another, employing their songs and their cries in what really became an existential struggle for the attention and the donations of passers-by as a sort of a key ingredient of survival. However, hardly any direct traces of the beggars' own perspectives survived the war. Often only their songs remain, alongside other sort of scarce archival traces. Most scholarship on Holocaust music, including on the Warsaw Ghetto, has focused more on traditional and official performance contexts for a variety of kinds, less on street performances, although there are exceptions. Yet beggars were integral to the ghetto's musical life, and additionally, a handful of their songs actually gained real popularity. Moreover, any reading of diaries and memoirs from the ghetto shows that beggars and their songs are consistently present across many of these texts, whether contemporaneous or post-war. And a full consideration of life and death in the ghetto must therefore include their presence. Their songs, therefore, I argue, can offer us a vital glimpse into beggars' daily lives and into the survival strategies that they employed, and can help us to better understand the ghetto's sonic environment, its soundscape, in its totality. I'm today going to discuss three different songs to shed light on how beggars used music to draw attention to their plight and to call for aid, as well as why their appeals in these particular songs connected with their listeners. Oh, there we go. So in a May 1942 diary entry, the Warsaw Ghetto resident Herr Schwasser recorded a fragment of a beggar's song. And he wrote, "Of a song, or rather a plea with a melody which I often hear sung in the yard. Dear people, I beg, dear people, I beg, throw down a piece of bread, or stale crumbs of bread, or some pennies for a bit of bread." This is recognizable as a song also preserved in a post-war Holocaust song collection under the title Hotz Mitleid, Hotz Rachmonis, or Have Compassion, Have Mercy, in which the text reads, "Have compassion, have mercy, throw down a little piece of bread, old pieces of bread, old crusts of bread, old burnt crumbs of bread." And you can see here the Yiddish text as well as the sheet music for it. So this version of the text appears in Shmeka Kaczynski's 1948 book, Lieder von die Ghettos und Lagern, or Songs from the Ghettos and Camps, which is a collection of hundreds of songs, some of them like this one with accompanying sheet music, sung during the Holocaust. Warsaw Ghetto survivor Irena Janowska provided this song's text and melody to Kaczynski, himself a survivor of the Vilna Ghetto and a former partisan after the war. According to Janowska, the song was performed, and I quote, by a poor man who led around his wife, who was swollen with hunger, encircled by 6 children. Now, you may note on the image here in his transcription of the song's melody, Kaczynski provided a single performance direction, and I'm not sure how many of you are musicians, but it reads here, REC, presumably an abbreviation of recitative, a style of singing that mimics and accentuates the delivery of ordinary speech instead of following a conventional melody. It's sort of a sung speech. It's uncertain in this context. We can't quite be certain whether he meant to refer to operatic recitative or the cantorial recitative characteristic of Eastern European chazones, or religious music performed in the synagogue, though the singer's use of a musical scale in this piece, characteristic of klezmer music and Eastern European cantorial music, does strongly suggest the latter. In either case, this marking, together with Wasser's description of a plea with a melody, gives us a glimpse, not just into the words, but into how the song was performed, how it actually sounded. Both suggest a style that may have involved a great deal of improvisation and especially emotive expressiveness on the singer's part. Such highly emotional pleas were characteristic of many beggars' songs in the Warsaw Ghetto. Moreover, the singer's ability to use music to connect with their audience affectively was a key survival strategy. Only those beggars most able to attract this kind of appreciative audience could earn enough to live. Now, while this song indicates how beggars could use emotional appeals to connect, the most widespread and popular beggar songs in the Warsaw Ghetto were called Mues Mues, or Money Money, and Dibona, or the ration card. The longest versions of these songs' texts are preserved in an ethnographic report for the ghetto's underground archive, Oinik Shabbos, prepared by archive contributor Nehemiah Stulman. While the song's writers were unknown, we do know that they originated among beggars and were, as Stulman writes, sung in various forms, often with a dance by various beggars, both women and children. Both of these two songs became popular enough that professional singers in the ghetto's theaters and cafes actually added them to their repertoires. The frequency with which both songs appear in the archival record and in ghetto survivors' testimony, as well as the multiple versions in which they appear, are strong signs of their broad appeal. Essentially, if you come across a text talking about beggar songs in the Warsaw Ghetto, it is a very, very strong chance that if it references a specific song, it will be one of these two. They appear very, very frequently. Both songs also directly address inequality in the ghetto, and both at least partially originated in the sayings and public performances of Rubinstein, the ghetto's most notorious and beloved beggar, pictured on this slide. So Rubinstein's an interesting figure. He appears in nearly every surviving account from the ghetto, and we don't know much about his background or who he was or even his first name. But we do know he developed a repertoire of distinctive Yiddish phrases and songs that profoundly influenced the ghetto's soundscape and its vocabulary. Numerous accounts agree that Rubinstein's most widely repeated phrases were alle gleich, all are equal, that is, in the face of death, Jingel halt sich, meaning hang on, boy, that is to say, do not give up, and in various forms, give up the ration card. To explain this third, rations in the ghetto were a lifeline, albeit an extremely insufficient one. And many families in the ghetto, because of the insufficiency of rations, would not immediately report their family members' deaths and would instead simply place the body outside on the sidewalk. This allowed them to keep the deceased person's ration card and thereby receive that person's rations at least for a few weeks. So to give up the ration card then was to abandon this kind of effort to survive and to succumb to death. Stanisław Gąbinski, who was a member of the Order Service, or the Jewish police in the ghetto, wrote in his memoirs after the war that the whole ghetto repeated Rubinstein's slogans. And Oinig Shabbos's leader, Emanuel Ringelblum, even claimed in his diary that the ghetto's Melody Palace Theater staged a revue titled Alle gleich, all are equal. Rubinstein's status helps to illuminate why the beggar songs he influenced became so popular. Like the slogans they referenced, these songs appealed to widely shared experiences of ghetto life. The first song, Die Bonne, and there's an image of the text here on this slide, uses two of Rubinstein's slogans, Jingel halt sich, or hang on boy, and give up the ration card. Multiple textual versions survive, all of which mix Yiddish and Polish to some degree. This is the longest version pictured here, which appears in one of Titelman's reports on beggars and ghetto folklore, transcribed from a performance by 16-year-old orphan beggar Yankiv Leib Solnitsky in June of 1942. Solnitsky performed songs already widely known in the ghetto, so he was not the originator of this song. But Titelman wrote that his very pleasant little voice, as well as his bright face and beautiful eyes, brought him some success as a beggar, along with his choice of repertoire. I've translated here the text. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud, but I do want to draw your attention to a couple of key points. The lyrics to Die Bonne, or the ration card, are fairly grim. They're confronting death pretty directly. And they use Rubinstein's euphemism for death, giving up the ration card repeatedly. You'll see throughout here. It appears over and over again in these lyrics. But this focus on death and on giving up the ration card markedly contrasts with the song's light, cheerful melody, which is actually borrowed from a lullaby called Ach śpi kochanie, or Oh Sleep, My Darling, from the 1938 Polish film Paweł i Gaweł. In this version of the text, the singer criticized the ghetto's leaders, especially Adam Czerniaków, head of the ghetto's Jewish council, or Judenrat, for their role in producing inequality. The privileged, could collect taxes. As you see, he takes money in the Judenrat, secure in their own survival while others suffered. Yet the song offered also a perverse hope for vengeance, that Czerniaków would meet an unpleasant end. He may soon and quickly die a violent death, when he would be dressed in a white uniform, the white kittel in which observant Jews are buried. Stulman also transcribed a shorter, mostly Polish version, also evidently provided by Solnicki, a Polish version of this song. And in this version, the singer targets Motyl or Mordechai Pinkiert, who is owner of the ghetto's most prominent undertaker's firm, which flourished amid thousands of dead and dying people. Both Czerniaków and Pinkiert were lightning rods for criticism in this way. And by appealing to this kind of widely shared resentment, beggars like Solnicki could find an appreciative audience. The other popular song influenced by Rubinstein and his slogans was Mues Mues, or money, money. It's sometimes referred to in the literature as Moes. I'm here using the Warsaw pronunciation that essentially would have helped it rhyme and scan, right? And it's also what we hear in recordings, post-war recordings. It was similarly preserved in multiple versions by Oyneg Shabbos, as well as by diarists and in post-war testimony. But again, the longest and most complex version we have also came from Solnicki. Like Die Bonne, the melody is remarkably cheerful. Sorry, I've lost my paper here. It's remarkably jaunty and cheerful, emphasizing through contrast the text's bitter, ironic humor. Still, much like Die Bonne, Mues Mues also captures the social tensions generated by the ghetto's severe inequality. And I haven't translated all of the lyrics here. I could give you more detail on them if you're curious, but they proclaim, if you have no money, that's your misfortune. Give up your ration card or give away the ration card and say goodbye, implying that poverty is not only bad luck, but effectively fatal. Along with Rubinstein's slogan, the Judenrat and Pinkiert reappear in this song alongside the Jewish order service as emblems of power, contrasted with the precarity of the singer and other ordinary ghetto residents. In another stanza, the song also derides Judenrat-mandated measures against human body lice, the vector of epidemic typhus, as a great misfortune for every Jew. In practice, the humiliating sanitation measures they mandated often spread more disease than they prevented and tended to destroy residents' belongings. Those who could afford to do so routinely paid bribes to be exempted. The song's use of dark humor, irony, and wordplay recalled a longer tradition of satirical Yiddish song, employing humor and satire to confront and mock the ghetto's elites, much as the Brodersingers, Yiddish entertainers who often walked a narrow line between serious songs and parody, had done nearly a half-century earlier, or even as Bat Honim, traditional wedding jesters, had done for centuries before that. That this song, along with Die Bonne, survived in multiple versions and in so many survivors' testimonies demonstrates their wide resonance with listeners. This is particularly remarkable given that non-beggars' accounts of the ghetto often expressed resentment against beggars' sonic disruptions, the amount of sound they essentially made, of whatever private space they could glean. While passers-by often turned away from the painful sight of the dead and dying on the ghetto streets out of a desire for sort of psychological self-preservation, if nothing else, both of these songs directly confronted the ghetto's severe inequalities, including the unequal threat of death for the very poor. Their catchy tunes and witty lyrics undoubtedly helped deliver an unpleasant message, but the difference also lay in how the songs attributed responsibility. Their popularity, I argue, stemmed not just from their emotional appeal, but from how they confronted the ghetto's social inequality while attributing blame to a handful of individuals and organizations, Adam Chernyakov, Model Pinkett, the Judenrat, and the Order Service. And the beggars were not necessarily incorrect. Those with any power in the ghetto, particularly the Order Service, sometimes did engage in real corruption and abuses of power that increased others' misery. Yet it's also true that nothing the ghetto's elites could have done would have actually remedied the ghetto's fundamental harms. As the Holocaust historian Christopher Browning has written, and I quote, Nazi power placed Jews in a less than zero-sum game in which they had some agency or choice, but all choices caused harm to many, and no choice guaranteed saving the life of anyone. Yet it was exactly for this reason that the songs appealed, by identifying specific sources of harm and sources ghetto residents could oppose far more effectively than they could the Nazis. These songs opened the possibility that the ghetto's injustices could be remedied and its community restored. In this way, Beggars Yiddish language songs reveal their active role in the ghetto's social fabric and its residents' efforts to preserve and defend that community, efforts that characterized much of daily life in the ghetto until the moment of its destruction. Thank you very much.